She kissed me that morning like she always did, softly, tenderly, like a woman without a secret in the world. I tasted her lie before my coffee even cooled. There's a kind of silence that lives in the bones of a house. It doesn't hum like loneliness or scream like grief. It just waits. Ours had that silence. Polished floors, white walls, designer furniture. Everything was beautiful. Still, curated. Like a magazine spread of a life nobody really lived. That I used to think it was peace. That hush that lingered after Ava left for her yoga class and I settled into my home office. The tick of the clock. The whisper of the central air. A life that had everything. On the surface. But silence is clever. It doesn't warn you. It watches you. And mine had been watching me for years. Ava was the kind of woman people remembered. The kind who stepped into a room and made the air recalibrate itself around her. She wore elegance like it was tailored to her spine. Blonde waves. Skin like a goddamn porcelain doll. Eyes so blue they looked unreal under certain lighting. She smiled at you and made you believe, for a moment, that maybe the world was good. To the outside world, she was perfect. To me, she was a question I'd stopped trying to answer. We'd been married 7 years. Lived in a glass and stone house in the hills. I ran a risk management firm, boring to most, but lucrative. She had an interior design business, the kind that needed more branding than clients. But we could afford illusions. And in our world, illusions were everything. She played the role well. The perfect wife. The charming hostess. She volunteered. She laughed at the right jokes. She made men feel seen and women feel irrelevant. But behind that smile, there was something else. Something cool. Something calculating. It started small, as these things do. A few missed calls. A dinner cancellation here. A locked phone there. But what really got me, what broke the dam, was the smell, not perfume, not sweat, not anything overt. It was absence. She came home one night, late. Claimed she'd had drinks with a client, some new celebrity stylist. She was glowing, too much, I thought. Her laughter had an echo I didn't recognize. When I kissed her cheek, she turned her head away just slightly, but enough. She didn't smell like wine or Chanel or even traffic. She smelled erased. Like someone who had gone to lengths to not leave a trace. I sat with that for a week. I didn't say a word. I observed. I cataloged. I rehearsed every conversation. But suspicion is a disease. It metastasizes. And soon, I wasn't eating. I wasn't sleeping. I started following her. Thursday. Yoga at 9. Except it wasn't yoga. I tailed her in a black rental SUV, 2 cars behind. She didn't notice. She drove down Sunset, then up into Laurel Canyon. Wound her way through the back roads like she'd done it before. Turned into a narrow driveway. High gates. A modernist fortress. The kind of place where no neighbors ask questions. She was inside for 3 hours. I didn't move. Didn't blink. Just sat there, hands clenched on the wheel, heart thundering. She came out smiling. That same curated smile she wore at charity galas. She looked satisfied. She didn't see me. Or maybe she did. Maybe she knew the game was already shifting, and I was too far behind. Temptation, they say, is the beginning, but I don't think she was tempted. I think she was born for this. Not the affair. Not the lies. The performance. The game. The quiet power of having someone believe one thing while doing another. Ava didn't cheat for affection. She cheated for control. For the thrill of knowing she was always one step ahead. What haunted me more than the betrayal was the way she made it look like love. She still cooked on Fridays. Still asked about my day. Still moaned in bed like I was the only one. Still whispered, "I love you," with just enough conviction to pass. She was flawless, and I became an actor in a play I didn't know I'd auditioned for. I started collecting data. Photos. Emails. Phone logs. Hired a PI to confirm what I already knew. His name was Felix Carr, mid-40s. Tall. Expensive, always smiling. Real estate developer. Married twice. No kids. He met Ava through a design project for one of his penthouses. The affair had been going on for almost a year. Do you understand what that does to a man? Knowing the person you sleep beside has been betraying you while looking you in the eye? That every dinner, every anniversary, every shared joke was a piece of a puzzle you were too blind to see. It corrodes you. Not all at once. Not loudly, quietly. Methodically, like acid beneath the skin. One night, I stood outside our bedroom door, listening. She was on the phone, voice low, intimate. laughing in that breathy way she reserved for sex or seduction that I don't know what she said exactly. But I remember the tone, like a woman confessing her sins to a man who wanted them. And I knew, in that moment, I wasn't losing her, I'd already lost her. What came next wasn't rage. It was calculation. Because if Ava could live 2 lives, so could I. And if she wanted a game, I'd learn how to win it. Ava always said I was the stable one. The rock. The man who never raised his voice. Never wavered. She mistook my silence for weakness. That was her first mistake. There's a room in every house where secrets like to gather. In ours, it was the guest room at the end of the hall. Rarely used, sparsely furnished, always quiet. I started calling it the spider's room. It's where I spun my web. After I confirmed the affair, I didn't confront Ava. Not directly. That would have been emotional, human, and I was done being human around her. I needed to become something else. Something colder. More precise. Something she wouldn't recognize. So I built a world inside that room. I set up a burner laptop. Voice recorder. File folders labeled with dates and names. Photos and envelopes. I even lined the closet with soundproof foam. That room became my sanctuary. My madness. My confession box. Each time she lied to me, I added to the file. Each time she kissed me, knowing she'd already kissed someone else, I wrote it down. You see, betrayal has a rhythm. If you watch close enough, it starts to sing. Tuesday. She said she had a consult in West Hollywood at noon. By 12:03, I had her location pinged at the Montage Hotel in Beverly Hills, room 916. I didn't go up. I just waited in the lobby, ordered an espresso, watched couples come and go, watched men who looked like Felix, well-fed, well-dressed, their egos oozing through tailored suits. Men who smiled like nothing in the world could touch them. At 1:34 p.m., she exited the elevator, alone, hair tousled, sunglasses on, lips parted. She didn't look guilty. She looked radiant. That's when it hit me. She wasn't doing this because she was unhappy. She was doing it because she could, and because nobody had ever shown her what it meant to fall. That night, we had dinner on the terrace. Just the 2 of us. The city lights below, flickering like 1,000 watching eyes. I grilled salmon. She poured wine. She told me about a potential new client, some producer's wife, total diva. I nodded, smiled, asked if she wanted dessert. She said she was full. She had no idea I'd been in room 916 3 hours earlier. No idea I'd paid the maid to let me in. No idea I had taken pictures of the bed, the wine glasses, the lipstick stain on the sheet. And no idea I'd taken something from the room. A single earring. Gold. Teardrop. Hers. I placed it in the drawer of my desk, beneath a folder labeled Control. Ava was meticulous, but she had a pattern. Wednesdays were for Felix, always between 11 and 3. Always under the pretense of a staging consult or design meeting. She kept it varied. Locations, excuses, clothing. But the rhythm was there. What fascinated me wasn't the act. It was the ease. She could pivot from his arms to mine like it was nothing. Laugh at his jokes in the morning, then curl up with me at night, humming some melody as if her body wasn't a crime scene. She was better than I gave her credit for, but not better than me. A month into my surveillance, I started noticing gaps. Small ones. Uncomfortable silences in her stories. A momentary stutter before she named the restaurant. A hesitation before she said client. She was slipping, not because of guilt, because she thought she'd won. Felix, it turned out, was more than just an affair. He was leverage, influence. He was opening doors for her, introductions to bigger clients, whispers of investment into her brand, promises of a showroom in Venice. She was positioning herself for something, and I realized this wasn't just infidelity. This was a coup. Ava didn't just want freedom. She wanted power over me, over her future, over the lie we called marriage. One night, I tested her that we were in bed. Lights off. Silence stretching between us like a blade. I reached for her, slowly, like I used to. She turned to face me. You okay? She whispered. Yeah, I said. Just thinking. About. I let the silence hang, just long enough. Us. She exhaled, rolled onto her back. I'm glad, she said. I feel like we've been distant lately. I almost laughed. Instead, I kissed her shoulder. We'll find our way back. She nodded, eyes closed. Peaceful. She believed me, and that's when I knew. She was vulnerable, because even the best liars forget to look behind them. The thing about webs is, They look beautiful to the spider, but to the fly, it's a grave that I started feeding her misinformation. Dropped hints about business troubles. Mentioned a tax audit that didn't exist. Let her think I was pulling back from work, distracted, uncertain. I watched her shift. She became more affectionate. Asked more questions. Started scheduling more consults. Ava wasn't worried about me. She was checking to see if the tree she was about to leap from still had fruit. She thought I was weak. That was her second mistake. In early November. She made her move. We were sitting on the couch, a fire crackling, her legs curled beneath her. I've been thinking, she said, stirring her tea. About the future. Oh, maybe we should sell the house, she said carefully. Downsize. Get something less complicated. I sipped my bourbon. Why? She shrugged. Fresh start. It was a test. She was watching me. I leaned back, playing my part. Maybe. She smiled, touched my arm. I just want us to be happy. And I saw it, just for a flicker, the shift in her eyes. She thought she had me cornered. She didn't know I had already cut her parachute. They say power reveals who you really are, but I don't think that's true. I think the illusion of power does, and Ava was drunk on it. She had no idea what was coming. No idea how far I'd go. No idea who she was really married to. Because I wasn't the man she thought I was anymore. I wasn't her husband. I was the reckoning she never saw coming. She once said the only sin she couldn't forgive was weakness. I carved that into my memory like scripture. And made sure, when I came for her, I came strong. There's a journal in my desk drawer, leather-bound, worn at the edges, its pages heavy with ink. It doesn't look like much, just another notebook, the kind executives carry to feel important. But inside, it holds her entire world. Her lies, her movements, her dissent. I call it the ledger. It began as a tool for clarity, a way to track her betrayal, map it, make sense of it. But over time, it became something else. A ritual, a penance. Each entry a prayer to the version of me that still needed justice. Each word, a nail in her perfect little coffin. October 4th. Ava leaves the house at 11:12 a.m., wears the red wrap dress. Says she's meeting Margot for lunch. GPS confirms otherwise, headed east, not west. Logs 2 hours and 43 minutes at 10:43, Kings Road. Alias used at concierge. Eva Lane. October 11th. She withdraws $4,000 in cash. Not from our joint account, one I didn't know about. Ends up in a trust fund in her maiden name. Buried deep in a shell corporation registered out of Nevada. October 15th. She texts Felix. Calls him my breath. My breath. I wrote that down 10 times that night, just to burn the image into my head. People think revenge is an emotion. It's not. It's a system. And mine was meticulous. Step 1. Financial containment. I slowly began to restrict her access to liquid assets. Moved money. Froze joint cards under the guise of security concerns. Shifted funds into accounts under the holding company's name. She barely noticed. Step 2. Social isolation. I threw a party, a big one. Industry people. Press. Ava loved to shine in those settings, loved to dazzle. I made sure to shift every spotlight away from her. Subtle, but cutting. Introduced her to people who didn't remember her name. Paired her with men who ignored her, women who outshone her. Step 3. Internal erosion. This part was the most delicate. I began to see doubt. Quietly. Strategically. You seem tired, Ava, I'd say. Did you forget about the dinner on Thursday? Strange, that's not like you. Are you sure you're okay? You've been distant. It was never aggressive, never accusatory. Just enough to make her wonder if she was slipping. If I was slipping. She started drinking more wine at night. Started checking her phone twice when it buzzed. Started second-guessing her outfits. Her tone. Her stories. She was unraveling. And the more she unraveled, the more control I took back. But there was one variable I hadn't accounted for. Felix, he wasn't just a lover. He was a mirror of me, but bolder, flashier, less concerned with concealment. He believed in leverage. And he was smart enough to know Ava wasn't in love with him. She was using him. The difference between me and Felix? I knew how to disappear that he needed to be seen. And that would be his undoing. Late one night, I sat in the spider's room, listening to the recordings. My PI had bugged the Jaguar she used to visit him. Microphone hidden behind the vent. It was their 4th encounter that month. His voice was smooth. Confident. You think he suspects? A pause. Her voice, low and amused. He's not that clever. That was the moment. That sentence that I didn't flinch. Didn't rage. Just stared at the words I'd written earlier that day. October 27th. She thinks I'm not that clever. I underlined it. Twice. Then I circled it. Then I smiled that I didn't want to just expose her. I wanted her to feel the floor fall out beneath her feet. So I began crafting her mirror out a version of herself, built from shadows. Digital trails, forged messages, vague receipts. I constructed an alternate Ava, one who had quietly been laundering funds, holding secrets, manipulating me. Enough to make anyone, including the law, take a closer look. That it wasn't hard. She'd already laid the foundation. I just amplified the frequency. I sent a tip, anonymous, of course, to one of the tabloids. Interior design queen tied to real estate fraud? The story didn't stick. Not yet. But it echoed. A seed of doubt. A question whispered in the right ear. A shadow behind her spotlight. And then came November 12th, the night of the gala. We were dressed to perfection. She in a black silk gown that caught the light like it was born from starlight. I wore navy. Classic. Understated. The venue was full. Laughter, clinking glasses, old money, and new fame tangled in crystal chandeliers. She worked the room like a queen, and I watched her, closely. Then I introduced her to a man she didn't recognize, Victor. Private security. Disguised as a potential investor. They spoke for 4 minutes. He asked about her business. Her clients. Her accounts. She answered. Smooth. Poised. Then he asked one question, pre-planned. So do you manage the trust in Nevada yourself? Or does someone advise you? I saw it, the stutter, the flicker, just for a second. But it was enough. That night, she didn't sleep. She tossed, turned, checked her phone, stared at the ceiling. I pretended to sleep beside her, my breathing deep and steady. But inside, I was awake, wide awake. And in that moment, I realized something. She wasn't untouchable. She never had been. She was just very, very good at pretending. But now, she wasn't pretending well enough. The next morning, she came into the kitchen early. No makeup, robe still tied loosely. Pale. You ever feel like things are falling apart? She asked. I looked up from my coffee. Not really, I said. She nodded. Bit her lip. Looked out the window. I wanted to reach for her. To pull her back. To ask her why? Why any of it? But I didn't. Because I wasn't there to save her anymore. I was there to watch her fall. Love wears many faces. Desire, comfort, fear, possession. But the fourth one, the one no one speaks of, is destruction. And Ava wore it best. There's a photograph of us, framed in silver, on the mantle, Tulum. 2016. Sunlight in our eyes, drinks in hand. Her laughter caught mid-burst. We look like two people who made it. I used to stare at that photo when I still believed in second chances. Now, I keep it there like a tombstone. A reminder of where we buried the truth. In the weeks after the gala, Ava began to fracture. Not outwardly. Not yet. But I could see it in the small things. The restless pacing after dark. The way she'd start a sentence and lose her thread. The glass of wine that became 2. Then 3. She was unraveling in slow motion. The shadow of the Nevada trust loomed larger than she anticipated. Felix had gone quiet. Too quiet. My PI confirmed he was getting cold feet. Pulling back. She texted him 9 times in a single day. He answered none. And me? I was the ever-attentive husband I cooked. I listened. I reassured. Because when someone is falling, the last thing they expect is your hand behind their back. I kept the spider's room locked now that she'd never seen it. She never would. Inside, the walls were covered. Photos. Bank printouts. Threads of red yarn connecting timelines. Audio logs. A printed message from Felix to someone named Emery. She's clever, but not clean. We need an exit plan. I was almost impressed. He had realized the truth faster than I thought he would. That Ava wasn't built for love. She was built for conquest. She finally confronted me on a Tuesday. Rain tapped against the kitchen windows. The house smelled like ginger and garlic. I'd been making stir-fry. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, hair still damp from the shower. Can I ask you something? She said. I nodded. Stirring rice. Are you watching me? I didn't flinch. What do you mean? Don't play dumb, Michael. That tone. Sharp. Controlled. She wasn't scared yet. Just suspicious. I played the part. Wounded. Confused. Affectionate. No. Of course not. She stared at me. Long silent. Her mouth open like she wanted to say something else. But then she just walked away. 10 minutes later, she came back. Said dinner smelled amazing. Kissed my cheek. And I realized something terrifying. She didn't want to know the truth. Not really. Because knowing meant she'd lost control. They say a woman knows when something has shifted in a man. Ava began watching me. Quietly. Studying my habits like I once studied hers. She asked more questions. Gave fewer answers. She'd always been the one with the upper hand. Now she was second-guessing every move. She didn't trust Felix. She didn't trust her contacts. She didn't trust herself. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't trust me. It was beautiful. There's a certain silence that comes before a storm. Not the calm kind. The eerie kind. The kind that feels wrong. That silence lived in our bedroom now that we slept back to back. She stopped initiating. So did I. We kissed hello and goodbye. But it felt more like a transaction than a ritual. A checkmark. A habit. And still, she didn't leave. Because part of her believed she could fix it. That's the tragedy of manipulators. They never account for consequences that can't be undone. Then came the breaking point. She found the ledger. I was careless. Just once. Forgot to relock the drawer in my office. I came home from a fake client dinner to find her sitting in the spider's room. The journal open on her lap. Every page exposed. She didn't look up. Just turned a page slowly, fingers trembling. I trusted you, she whispered. The irony hit me so hard I almost laughed. But I didn't. Because this moment wasn't about her guilt. It was about her fear. She stood slowly. Held the journal out like it was something diseased. You've been tracking me. Spying on me. I nodded. No use denying it now. You have no idea what you've done, she said. Her voice cracked. You think you're in control? You think this makes you the victim? No, I said quietly. It makes me the one who woke up. She laughed then. Bitter. Broken. You always were so boring, Michael. So safe. You wanted a pretty wife and a quiet life. You didn't want me. Not the real me. I didn't know the real you, I said. Yes, you did, she snapped. You just ignored her because she scared you. There was a pause. Heavy. Dense. Maybe I did, I said. But you know what scares you, Ava? She met my eyes. The fact that someone finally saw through your goddamn performance. She tried to leave that night that I let her in, yelling. No threats. Just silence. She packed a bag, slammed the door, and disappeared into the rain that I watched from the window. 3 hours later, her car returned. She never came in. Just sat in the driveway. Engine idling. I stood in the dark, watching her silhouette flicker behind the windshield wipers. Eventually, she killed the engine and cried. Not quietly. Not beautifully. Loud, messy, childlike sobs. The sound didn't comfort me. It broke something in me I didn't know was still intact. Because in that moment, she wasn't a monster. She was just human. Just wrong. We didn't speak the next morning. She moved through the house like a ghost. Her skin was pale. Her voice dull. Her eyes no longer scanned for power. She had seen the fourth face of love. And it had taken everything. One thinks they're the villain in their own story. They lie. They cheat. They destroy. And still, they believe they're owed a happy ending. But gravity doesn't care about belief. When you fall, you fall. It began with whispers. First at the yoga studio, an offhand comment, a glance that lingered a beat too long. Then the cancellation of a high-profile client. The showroom project Felix promised? Quietly postponed. Invitations stopped arriving. Calls went unanswered. Even her closest allies, the women she laughed with over cocktails, the ones who lived for curated brunches and curated lives, started keeping their distance. Ava didn't notice at first, but I did, because I had planted the seeds, and they were blooming, one by one. The anonymous blog post dropped on a Wednesday. The Queen of Mirrors. It wasn't overt. Just enough to sting. A thinly veiled character assassination cloaked in fiction. Descriptions too specific to be coincidence. A designer who sleeps her way through contracts. A wife who uses charm like currency. A woman who's built her empire on the silence of her husband. I hadn't written it, but I had given someone else the materials. The whispers became questions. Questions became rumors. Rumors, dangerous things in a city built on image, became facts. Within a week, Ava's brand began to bleed. She tried to ignore it. Held her head high. Posted smiling photos. Quoted self-help books. Pushed the narrative of a woman evolving through adversity. But Ava didn't know how to survive when the story wasn't hers to write, and I was already holding the pen. She confronted me again. This time, furious. "You're doing this," she hissed, her fingers trembling as she slammed her phone onto the counter. "You're feeding them. Spinning this shit like some deranged little war." "I haven't said a word," I said calmly. "Don't lie to me. Like you did." Her face twisted. Pain, rage, something worse. "You think this makes us even?" "No," I said. "It makes us honest." She blinked. And in that instant, I saw it. The truth crashing into her. This wasn't about Felix anymore. Or the lies. Or even the betrayal. This was about control. And she had lost it. She stopped going out. Pulled away from the world that once revolved around her. She still dressed the part. Makeup, heels, sleek hair. But it was armor now. Not fashion. She drank more. Slept less. Sometimes, I'd wake up at 3 a.m. and find her in the kitchen, barefoot, staring into nothing with a glass of red in her hand. She never spoke. She just existed, half there, half gone. Then came the day the IRS notice arrived. Official audit of the Nevada Trust that I hadn't initiated it directly. But I'd made sure the right breadcrumbs landed on the right desks. That IT was the final push. The moment the tower she built on deception began to crack, that I came home to find her. Sitting on the floor of our bedroom, surrounded by paperwork, hair undone, mascara smudged like ash under her eyes. "They're going to come after me," she whispered. "No," I said. "They're going to come after the version of you built. The one who thought the rules didn't apply." She looked up, and for the first time, really looked at me. Not as her husband, not as her victim, but as her mirror. "You planned this," she breathed. "I protected myself," I replied. "Something you never thought I'd be smart enough to do." She opened her mouth, then closed it, because she knew. She had created this war. She just didn't expect to lose it. Felix? Gone. Word was, he'd fled to Spain. Or Dubai. Or some island where money gets laundered and names get lost. That he left her with nothing. No deals. No promises. Not even a goodbye. And Ava, who always had an exit strategy, was finally cornered. Alone. One evening, as the sun bled over the hills and the house glowed gold and silent, she walked into the living room and stood before me in no makeup. No smile. Just the woman beneath the myth. "Why didn't you destroy me all at once?" she asked. That I looked at her for a long time. "Because I loved you," I said. "And I needed to watch that love die, inch by inch." She nodded slowly, and I think in that moment, she understood something neither of us had said aloud. This wasn't revenge. That IT was closure. She moved out 3 days later, and no drama. No tears. Just a note on the kitchen counter. "Michael, I thought I was untouchable. I was wrong. And I think some part of me is grateful. A. Underscore." I stood there for a long time after she left, staring at the spot where she used to laugh, dance, lie. That IT didn't feel like victory. That IT didn't feel like peace. That IT just felt empty. It's strange. The silence that follows devastation. No explosion. No curtain drop. Just stillness. The sound of 2 lives burning, and no one left to scream. The house didn't feel like home after she left. IT wasn't grief. I'd already buried whatever love I had for her somewhere between the third lie and the final affair. It was something else. A numbness. Like waking up in a city after a riot. The buildings still standing, but the soul long gone. That I wandered through rooms like a stranger. Her perfume still clung to the fabric of the couch. A half-burned candle sat on the bathroom counter. Her handwriting, sharp and delicate, still adorned a sticky note on the fridge. "Don't forget the dry cleaning, M." I left it there. Some ghosts need to linger a while. In the weeks that followed, I told no one. Not about the breakup. Not about the affair. Not about the quiet war I'd waged and won. Because winning didn't feel like I thought it would. No satisfaction. No triumphant soundtrack. Just the quiet echo of a question. What now? I worked. Obsessed over it. I buried myself in deals, numbers, risk assessments, things I could control. I stopped going to the gym. Stopped seeing friends. Didn't answer my brother's calls. When people asked about Ava, I gave them vague smiles and strategic shrugs. We're figuring things out. In truth, I was unraveling, but in silence, because men like me, we aren't allowed to fall apart. Not out loud. And then, one afternoon, a package arrived. No return address. Inside, a flash drive. I plugged it in, half expecting nothing. Or worse, something illegal, Dramatic, Ava-like. Instead, there was only one folder. Recordings. I opened the first file. Her voice, soft, uncertain, raw. I'm not doing this to beg. I need you to understand. I didn't set out to destroy anything. I was just trying to feel something again. Anything. I became a performance because the silence scared me more than the lies. Another file. He wasn't love, Michael. Not even close. He was noise. And I needed noise because you were always so still. So perfect. So good. And I hated you for it. And the final one. I think I wanted to be punished. I think I wanted to be caught. Because if you caught me, at least you were still looking. I sat there, unmoving, as her voice bled through the speakers. Each word a match dropped into a soaked heart, not to reignite the flame, but to remind me it had once burned, that I couldn't decide if it was manipulation or confession. Probably both. Ava never gave anything for free, but still, I played the files again, then again, because there was something about hearing her stripped of the performance that left a wound deeper than the betrayal ever had. For the first time, I heard not just the villain, but the human point. 3 months later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. New York area code. I let it go to voicemail. When I listened, it was her. Her voice steadier now. Older, maybe. I don't expect a response. Just wanted you to know. I'm in Manhattan. Starting over. Therapy's brutal, but I'm trying. I took a job at a gallery. Small, unglamorous. Feels real. I still think about you. Not with guilt anymore. With sadness. Hope you're well. Truly. I didn't save the voicemail, but I didn't delete it either. Some part of me needed it. Not as a door to reopen, but as a chapter one could finally turn. They say forgiveness is a gift you give yourself, but they don't say how long it takes to wrap it. Some days I felt close. Other days, I'd see a blonde woman at the store, and my stomach would tighten like I'd been sucker punched. That I didn't hate her anymore. But I didn't miss her, either. What I missed was the version of me who believed she loved me. And he was gone. One night, I found myself back in the spider's room. Only now, the walls were bare. The red yarn, the photos, the documents, all gone. I'd burned them. Every trace. All that remained was the journal. The ledger. I opened it. The ink had faded a little. But the story remained. Our story. A rise. A betrayal. A fall. And somewhere in the wreckage, redemption. Not because she changed, but because I did. Because I stopped waiting for the apology that would make it all make sense. Because I finally understood. Some people love in ways that only destroy. And walking away doesn't mean you lost. It means you survived. You don't bury someone you loved in a grave. You bury them in your routines. In the empty half of the bed. In the untouched coffee mug. In the pause where their name used to live. Spring came late that year. The hills outside my window stayed brown until mid-April, and the jacarandas didn't bloom like they used to. I remember standing on the back patio one morning, coffee in hand, staring at the empty planter box Ava once filled with herbs she never used. She used to call it her garden of intentions. Parsley, thyme, lavender. Half of it died within weeks. She didn't water them consistently, but she'd walk by and still run her hand over the dried stems, saying, "They'll come back." She always believed everything would come back if she wanted it bad enough. But some things, some people, don't return. They echo, and echoes don't bloom. I started writing again. Not for work. Not to strategize. Just to write. Fragments at first. Memories. Questions I never asked her. Truths I never said aloud. Where were you the night you said you were with Margot? Did you love him in the moment? Or were you just performing again? Was I ever enough? Or was I just the audience you needed to feel real? Pages piled up. Not a story. Not a novel. Just a private reckoning.my version of therapy.my garden of echoes. I ran into her mother at the grocery store in early May. I almost didn't recognize her. Shorter hair. Cane. Softer presence than I remembered. Ava looked just like her around the eyes. She didn't seem surprised to see me. "Oh," she said. "So you're still here." Still here, like a man who'd been caught in a house fire but refused to move out. She asked if we talked. I said no. She nodded. Didn't ask why. Just stared at the avocados for a long time before saying quietly, "You know, Ava was always terrified of silence." Then she looked at me. "And you? You never learned how to break it." She left without another word. I stood there for 10 minutes before realizing I hadn't moved. She was right, of course. Ava filled the silence with lies. I armored myself with it. We were two people dancing in a soundproof room. too proud to scream, too scared to stop. And by the time we did, the music had already ended. One night, I got a text, an own name. Just, do you remember Tulum? The sandstorm, the fire pit, the mezcal. I stared at it. I hadn't spoken to her in nearly 6 months. That I deleted the message, then turned off my phone. Because yes, I remembered her laugh under the stars, the way the sky swallowed us whole, the heat of her hand in mine. That I remembered the night she whispered, "Promise me you'll never stop seeing me." And how I said, "Even when I close my eyes, you're all I see." God help me. I wasn't lying. Not then. But memory is a poor substitute for love, and she didn't deserve to live in mine anymore. People started asking if I was dating again. I wasn't. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know who I was outside the ruins. That it's strange how betrayal can define you long after it's gone, like smoke on fabric, or a scar you forget until the weather changes. Summer came. The light stayed longer. The silence didn't press as hard. One morning, I found myself replanting Ava's herb box. Fresh soil. Real cared, and oh declarations. No sentiment. Just an act of renewal. It felt small, insignificant, but it was mine. A promise to no one. Not even her. Just me. Some nights, I still dream of her, not as she was in the end, but as she was in the beginning. Her eyes lit up by candlelight. Her voice tracing poetry into the dark. The version of her, I think, even she forgot. And in the dream, she always turns to me and says, "You could have saved me." And I always whisper back, "No, I could have only followed you down." And then she fades, and I wake up, alone, whole, still here. There are men who enter your life like meteors, brief, bright, destructive. And then there are men like Felix, not a storm, not a fire, but a rot. The kind you don't notice until the beams start to crack. That you'd think I'd hate him. Felix Carr, the man who touched what wasn't his, who kissed her lies into permanence, who slipped into our lives like a thief and called it fate. But hate isn't the right word. That it's too honest, too personal. What I felt for Felix was colder, something between contempt and indifference. Like looking at a stain you can't scrub out of your favorite shirt. You don't scream. You don't cry. You just stop wearing it. After Ava left, he disappeared. No word. No scandal. Just gone. MYPI found a few traces. Private jet to Malaga under a business alias. A shell condo registered to an offshore trust. Typical high-end escape routes for men who like their power clean and untraceable. But something about his absence felt wrong. Too quiet. Too controlled. Felix wasn't the kind to vanish. He was the kind to win. Or at least pretend to point. 3 months after her voicemail from New York, I got an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside, a photo. Grainy. Nightlit. Security camera angle. Felix, sitting in a dark hallway, head in his hands. Not the suave developer in tailored suits. Not the man who made her feel electric. This was a man unraveling. On the back of the photo, someone had written, "You weren't the only one she broke." No signature. No hint of who sent it. But I knew. Ava. This was her version of a confession. Not to exonerate herself, but to say, "I didn't come out of this clean, either." I called the PI again. Told him I wanted details, and oh more breadcrumbs. 2 days later, he came back with a name. Emery Madsen. Felix's silent business partner. The one Ava never met, but whose money funded most of Felix's projects. Apparently, Emery pulled out, abruptly, messily. Rumor was, Felix had made promises tied to the Nevada account. Promises he couldn't back up. And when Ava's trust came under investigation, so did Felix's investments. Real estate deals collapsed. Partnerships soured. People started asking questions Felix couldn't answer. The facade cracked. And just like Ava, when the image broke, so did the man. There's a kind of poetry in that. Felix, sitting in some anonymous hallway, drowning in the same silence he helped create. Ava thought she was climbing. Felix thought he was controlling. But neither of them knew the truth. They were just mirrors for each other. She lied to escape herself. That he lied to maintain control. And in the end, they didn't fall because of me. They fell because they leaned too hard on each other. And the lie couldn't hold their weight. I found one more photo on the PI's USB drive. Felix, weeks later. Same face, but sharper now. Haunted. He was in a bar somewhere in Lisbon, staring into a half-empty glass. Alone. It struck me then. For all the passion, all the danger, all the twisted electricity between him and Ava, They didn't end up together. There was no romantic finale. No escape plan executed. No second act. They had used each other like scaffolding in a storm, and when the wind died, there was nothing left standing. Not love, not even lust, just ruins. That I kept the photo, not out of sentiment, but because sometimes we need to see the ones who almost destroyed us, powerless, not to gloat, but to remember, the worst things in life don't always come with warning signs or red flags. Sometimes they come dressed in charm, smiling, beautiful, and empty. I never reached out to Felix, never sent a letter, never picked up the phone, because what could I say? Thank you for proving what she was capable of. Thank you for teaching me how to burn quietly. No, some ghosts don't need names, just graves. And Felix's car was already buried. In her silence, and in mine. I didn't recognize the man in the mirror for months, not because he'd changed, but because he'd been hiding inside me all along. I just needed her betrayal to set him free. Healing is a word people toss around like it's linear, like you wake up one morning, drink a green smoothie, go for a run, and poof, you're whole again. They don't talk about the shadows that cling even after the sun returns. The phantom bruises. The habits that don't die, only go dormant. I didn't heal in one grand gesture. I unraveled, and then rebuilt. In pieces. And what I found underneath the wreckage surprised me more than Ava ever could. I used to think I was a good man. Not in a performative way. Just safe. Steady. I paid bills on time. Remembered birthdays. Never raised my voice. I believed in loyalty. In stability. In love as a thing you water, not chase. That's why she chose me. Because I was the opposite of chaos. But what I didn't realize, what I was too proud or too naive to admit, was that beneath my steadiness lived something darker. Not violence, but potential. For rage. For cunning. For vengeance so cold it didn't scream. It calculated. I was never the hero of this story, just the one who lasted longest. After Felix's silence and Ava's voicemail, I began walking again. Mornings mostly. Same trail every day, tucked in the canyon. Birdsong. Dust. Eucalyptus. It became my confessional. My place to sit with the choices I made. Because let's be honest, I didn't just uncover Ava's betrayal. I orchestrated her fall. I destroyed her reputation, crushed her leverage, made sure the people she depended on stepped back. I could have walked away quietly, but I didn't. And I had to ask myself, what kind of man does that? One morning, a woman on the trail smiled at me. Not the kind of smile that says flirt or follow me. Just kindness, recognition, maybe. I nodded. Kept walking. But something inside me shifted. It had been months since anyone looked at me without pity or fear or suspicion. And it reminded me, I was still capable of being seen. Not as a victim, not as a shadow, but as a man. I started writing again, for real this time. Not the journal, something more honest. The story of the man who loved a woman too deeply, too blindly. Who mistook beauty for truth. Who burned quietly until he exploded. It wasn't revenge porn. It wasn't a plea for sympathy. It was just the truth. My truth. And in writing it, I met a version of myself I hadn't seen since before Ava. A man not built on control or calculation, but clarity. I went back to therapy. Real therapy this time. Not YouTube quotes and whiskey-fueled introspection. I sat across from a woman named Dr. Hartley. She had soft hands and sharper eyes. The kind that didn't blink when I told her about the journal. About the spider's room. About the night Ava left, and I felt nothing. She didn't judge. She just said, "So you protected yourself in the only way you knew how." I exhaled, because for the first time in years, someone had said something I didn't have to unhear. I forgave Ava in stages. Not because she asked, but because I had to. I forgave the woman who performed more than she felt. I forgave the wife who chose power over partnership. I forgave the girl in her who never learned how to stay. I even forgave the silence, the lies, the red dress that came home smelling like absence. Because carrying her with me any longer would have meant I never left the wreckage. I reached out to her once. A lettered, in a return address. Just words, "You were right about me. I was silent too long. You were wrong about me too. I wasn't weak. I just believed in you harder than I believed in my own instincts. I don't hate you. But I don't miss you either. I hope Manhattan gives you something real. I hope you stay this time. Wherever you are. Don't reply. This isn't an invitation. Just closure. I never knew if she read it, didn't need to. Because the man who wrote it wasn't looking for permission anymore, but he was free. Closure isn't a door slamming shut, it's the sound of your own footsteps walking away and not turning back. Not because you stopped caring, but because you finally started caring about yourself more. I stood in front of the house one last time. The glass and stone monument we built together, her vision, my money, our delusion. It looked the same, almost insultingly so, like the walls had no memory of what happened inside them. As if betrayal didn't stain wood or seep into grout. The new owners had painted the front door a soft green. Ava would have hated that. She said front doors should be bold, red, black, something that made people pause. She never liked softness. Not in colors. Not in people. That I remember looking at her once and thinking, "You are the sharpest thing I've ever loved." I never told her that it would have sounded too much like worship. And I'd already bled enough for her altar. I walked around the back and stood by the herb garden. New soil. Something leafy growing there now. Maybe basil. I touched one of the leaves, felt how alive it was, how clean. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't think of her fingers brushing dead lavender. I just thought, someone else is planting here now. And I smiled. Not bitter, not broken, just lighter. They say after a storm, the air smells different. Like something was cleansed. That's how it felt when I drove away from the house for the last time. Not like running, not like escape, but like release. Like the final thread had snapped, and instead of falling, I stood to echo what happens after the end. Not the cinematic kind. Not the neat montage where I meet someone new and learn how to laugh again. Know the real after? It's smaller, quieter, more human. I got a dog. Not because I needed companionship, but because I wanted to build trust again, and a dog's love is a good place to start. Her name is Willa. She's a rescue. Jumps at thunderstorms but sleeps against my chest like I'm made of safety. Sometimes I wonder what Ava would have thought of her, but only for a moment. Then I go back to the present, because that's where Willa lives, and I want to meet her there. I reconnected with my brother, started answering calls, told him everything one night over bourbon and silenced. He didn't say much, just listened. Then he leaned back and said, "You came out the other side." I shook my head. "No," I said. "I walked through it. There's a difference. Surviving means you're still breathing. But walking through means you changed, and I had. Not into something harder, just something truer. I still have the journal, the ledger, but it's closed now. Locked in a box. Not because I'm afraid of it, but because it served its purpose. It showed me the shape of my pain. Now I don't need to measure it anymore." Ava never responded to my letter. She didn't need to. I heard she left New York. Some say she went west again. Others say she's in Italy, painting. That made me pause. Ava? Painting. But maybe she needed to break, too. Maybe she found softness at last. Or maybe she never did. Either way, she's not mine to wonder about anymore. I don't believe in karma. But I do believe in return. In the quiet cycle of hurt and healing. What you destroy may not come back, but what you plant after, that's yours to keep. Love didn't destroy me. Ava didn't destroy me. What almost did was the silence I lived inside for years. And now, I don't live in silence anymore. I speak. I write. I feel. Sometimes it hurts. Often it heals. Always, it's real. So here's the truth. The final truth. She betrayed me. I unraveled her. We both burned. But I rebuilt. Not for revenge. Not for redemption. Just to live. Better, stronger, clearer. And this is the story of that fire and the man who walked through it.